What happens when the people who carry out history's darkest crimes aren't monsters, but ordinary individuals who follow orders, keep secrets, and stop asking questions? In this episode of Gateway Books by Crestance, we explore The Reader, a haunting novel about guilt, love, and complicity; Lethal Woman, a historical account of the real Nazi woman who participated in the crimes of the Third Reich; and Eichmann in Jerusalem, Hannah Arendt's groundbreaking analysis of how evil can emerge from obedience and thoughtlessness. These books challenge us to rethink what justice means, who bears responsibility, and how easy it is to become complicit when we refuse to think. Evil often arrives quietly. It doesn't always shout or threaten. Sometimes it follows orders. Sometimes it stamps a document, locks a door, or turns away without asking a question. In episode 6, we move through 3 stories that ask what makes a person complicit and what allows ordinary people to participate in extraordinary crimes. The Reader, by Bernhard Schlink, explores guilt, memory, and a love shaped by silence. Lethal Woman reveals the real lives of Nazi women who stepped into roles of violence not as victims, but as enforcers. And Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem forces us to confront the quiet, bureaucratic face of evil and the moral void left by those who choose not to think. Join me as we move between fiction, history, and philosophy and ask what justice looks like when the truth is complex and the past refuses to stay quiet. I'm Cindy Cruz, and this is Gateway Books by Crestance, where historical fiction opens the door to a real history. At first glance, The Reader by Bernhard Schlink seems like a novel about memory, shame, and impossible love. But as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that it is also about something deeper: the human capacity for both moral blindness and moral awakening. The story follows Michael Berg, a teenager in 1950s post-war Germany who enters into a secret, passionate relationship with Hannah Schmitz, a woman more than twice his age. Their bond is built on intimacy, routine, and an unspoken hunger for connection. Yet it is also deeply uneven. Hannah maintains control, keeping parts of herself hidden. Their relationship is marked by a strange ritual. After their encounters, Michael reads to her from the Odyssey, The Lady with the Dog, and other classics. It is an act of devotion, but also one of innocence. Michael does not yet understand the world Hannah carries inside her. Years later, when Michael is a law student, he encounters Hannah again, not in the streets of Heidelberg, but in the courtroom. She stands trial, accused of war crimes for her role as a guard at a Nazi concentration camp. As the proceedings unfold, Michael begins to understand the pieces of Hannah's life he never knew: her complicity, her choices, and her secrets. One secret in particular haunts him. Hannah is illiterate, a fact that shaped her actions more profoundly than he ever realized. Schlink weaves these revelations with a profound sense to the psychological burdens of the post-war generation. Michael embodies the moral confusion of a society grappling with collective guilt. He feels betrayed by Hannah, but he also feels guilty for betraying her, for loving someone who committed atrocities, and for not fully grasping what that meant when he was young. In The Reader, Hannah is neither fully villainized nor absolved. Instead, Schlick portrays her as a person who submitted to a system because it offered structure, authority, and a way to conceal her shame. Her illiteracy becomes a metaphor for a larger inability or refusal, question, to rebel, to imagine the human suffering her actions inflicted. Importantly, The Reader is not about excusing Hannah. It's about confronting the uncomfortable reality that people who commit horrific acts are often not monsters. They are ordinary, flawed individuals who make devastating choices. Sometimes through malice, sometimes through weakness, sometimes through blind obedience. Through Michael's eyes, we experience the painful ambiguity of judgment. The novel forces readers to ask, how much agency does ignorance excuse? When does following orders become immoral? And what does it mean to love someone who has crossed an unthinkable line? Schlick's restrained, almost clinical prose enhances these questions rather than answers them. He offers no sweeping conclusions, only a quiet ache of understanding, an acknowledgement that memory, guilt, and love can coexist in irreconcilable ways. The final image of the novel, Michael visiting Hannah's grave, trying to bridge the chasm between past and present, encapsulates the central struggle of post-war Germany. How to remember without justifying, how to mourn without absolving, and how to carry forward without forgetting. In The Reader, the personal and the political are inseparable. Every intimate gesture between Michael and Hannah is shadowed by the historical crimes that neither of them can undo. Every act of remembrance is an act of reckoning. In Lethal Woman, readers are introduced to a side of history that often remains hidden: the women who actively participated in Nazi atrocities. These were not distant figures behind desks or passive observers. They were guards at concentration camps, nurses in euthanasia programs, administrators of cruelty. And they were not anomalies. They were ordinary women, secretaries, factory workers, housewives, drawn into a system of death and domination. The book profiles women like Irma Gress, the infamous guard at Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz, who was only 22 years old when she was executed for war crimes. Gress's youth and background, she was the daughter of a dairy worker, complicate the image of a monster. She was not born into evil. She entered it step by step, choosing advancement, authority, and power over empathy and resistance. Other profiles show similar patterns. Some women volunteer for positions in the camps to escape poverty. Others sought opportunities for status, better pay, or simply the thrill of control. A few seemed ideologically driven, but many were motivated by far more banal concerns: ambition, boredom, conformity. The horror lies not only in the atrocities they committed, but also in how disturbingly mundane their reasons often were. Lethal Woman challenges readers to rethink assumptions about female complicity. Traditional narratives have sometimes cast women as passive victims during war crimes, but history reveals a more complicated truth. Women were not only capable of violence, but in many cases, enthusiastic participants. The Frankfurt Auschwitz Trials reinforced this reality. Held in West Germany from 1963 to 1965, these trials prosecuted 22 former Auschwitz personnel, not the architects of genocide, but mid and lower level guards, medics, and clerks. For many Germans, it was the first time the full horror of Auschwitz was laid bare in court, and their complicity of ordinary individuals could no longer be ignored. Among the defendants were several women who had worked in Auschwitz and other camps, some of them holding supervisory roles. Their testimonies exposed the same patterns Hannah Arendt would famously describe: individuals who deferred moral responsibility to the system, who minimized their choices by insisting they were only following instructions. The trials also highlighted the limited scope of justice. Of the tens of thousands who served at Auschwitz, only a fraction were prosecuted. Many perpetrators, including women, reintegrated into post-war society with little scrutiny. Reading Lethal Woman alongside the reader deepens our understanding of Hannah Schmidt's fictional trial. Hannah's character is not based on a specific historical figure, but her actions mirror those of real women who navigated the Nazi bureaucracy with the same lethal combination of obedience, self-interest, and detachment. One of the most chilling elements of Lethal Woman is how normal these individuals seemed outside the context of their crimes. They wrote letters home, fell in love, gossiped with colleagues. Their capacity for brutality coexisted with their capacity for banality. The lives of these women are not cautionary tales about rare aberrations. They are warnings about the ease with which ordinary people, women and men alike, can become instruments of extraordinary cruelty. When Hannah Arendt published Eichmann in Jerusalem, her portrayal of one of the Holocaust key organizers shocked and unsettled the public. She had attended the 1961 trial of Adolf Eichmann, a former SS officer responsible for managing the deportation of Jews to extermination camps, expecting to see a monster. Instead, she encountered something far more disturbing: a man who was bland, bureaucratic, and painfully ordinary. Eichmann was not driven by fanaticism or deep-seated hatred. He was not particularly intelligent or ideologically extreme. He was, in Arendt's word, a man who failed to think. A man whose crimes stemmed not from sadism, but from a refusal to question the system he served. This insight led her to the phrase that would define the book and ignite decades of debate: the banality of evil. Arendt's point was not that evil is trivial, but that it can take root in mundane places. It thrives in paperwork, in protocol, in obedience. It becomes most dangerous when carried out by those who don't ask questions, those who compartmentalize, rationalize, and submit. This framework casts a chilling shadow over the stories told in Lethal Woman. Like Eichmann, many of the women profiled were not zealous ideologues. They were desk clerks, nurses, guards, and administrators who chose convenience over conscience. The parallels with the reader are striking. Hannah Schmidt's is not a direct allegory for Eichmann, but her logic echoes his. She insists she was just doing her job, that the rules were clear, that someone had to do it. She's not malevolent in the traditional sense. She's unreflective, detached. And her greatest failure, like Eichmann's, is the refusal to see fully the human beings affected by her actions. Arendt emphasizes that failure to think is not the same as ignorance. Eichmann was not unintelligent. He was evasive, slippery, and deeply invested in protecting himself from the moral reckoning. In the reader, Schlink mirrors this idea through Hannah's illiteracy. Her inability to read becomes a metaphor for something more widespread: a moral illiteracy, shared by many who participated in the Nazi regime. The Frankfurt Auschwitz Trials, where Hannah's fictional case is loosely modeled, make Arendt's argument tangible. These trials prosecuted not the masterminds of genocide, but clerks, doctors, and guards, the people who turned the machinery. And many of them, like Eichmann, defended themselves with the same refrain: they were following orders. They had no choice. Arendt insisted that this defense was not enough. Obedience does not erase responsibility. Conformity is not innocence. The refusal to think is itself a dangerous and culpable choice. What makes Eichmann in Jerusalem so enduring is not just its analysis of a single man, but its warning about the system that enables such men to thrive. Bureaucracies, when coupled with ideology and indifference, can make atrocities feel impersonal. They allow individuals to abdicate judgment, to hide behind roles, to participate in horror without ever feeling they pulled the trigger. This is not just a lesson about the Holocaust. It is a cautionary tale about power, conformity, and the human tendency to offload moral responsibility onto structures. It forces us to ask, what does it mean to be complicit? And how easily could we too slip into roles that require obedience over reflection? Arendt's work is provocative because it removes the distance. She does not let us believe that evil is committed only by others. She demands that we see how systems seduce, how orders silence conscience, and how everyday people can become agents of immense harm. In pairing the reader, Lethal Woman, and Eichmann in Jerusalem, we are left with a sobering yet essential realization. Evil is not always loud. It is not always obvious. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it wears a suit. Sometimes it wears a blank expression and sense of form. And if we are to resist it, truly resist it, we must remain vigilant in our thinking, steadfast in our empathy, and unafraid to question even the quietest forms of obedience. The Frankfurt Auschwitz Trials reveal something the world hadn't fully confronted before: that the Holocaust was not carried out by a handful of masterminds, but by thousands of ordinary people who stepped into roles and followed them to the end. Many of them, men and women, didn't invent evil. They simply accepted it. They looked away and did their jobs. The 3 books we explored in this episode force us to sit with that truth. The reader invites us to question how personal guilt and collective memory shape the next generation. Lethal Woman shows us how easily ambition and obedience can become weapons. And Arendt, in Eichmann in Jerusalem, reminds us that evil can thrive not in chaos, but in order, when thinking stops and habit takes its place. But even in these dark stories, there's a reason to look forward. If evil can be ordinary, then so can resistance. History doesn't just live in archives and trials. It lives in us, in what we choose to notice, in what we're willing to question, in how we remember, and what we do with that memory. Thank you for listening, for reading, and for remembering. If you'd like to explore more stories like this, visit Crestance.com, where you'll find book-inspired gear, thoughtful gifts, and home decor designed for readers who believe that literature and history belong in the spaces we live in. Every design supports the mission behind Gateway Books by Crestance, to keep stories alive and to make space for reflection in our daily lives. You can also subscribe to our channel for more episodes, thoughtful shorts, and multilingual editions. And if this conversation moved you, I would love to hear your thoughts and comments. Until next time, keep reading bravely, thinking deeply, and living with insight.